All right, so today we're doing more than just explaining a philosophy. We're cracking open a cold case. We're going to be detectives, digging into the hidden origins of our most basic moral beliefs. We'll be dusting for fingerprints on the words we use every single day, words like good, evil, guilt, and conscience. Our lead detective on this case? None other than Friedrich Nietzsche, and his case file is On the Genealogy of Morality.
So, let's just jump right into the central mystery here. Nietzsche kicks things off with this really unsettling question. What if that moral compass you think you were born with, what if it's not a fact of nature at all? What if it's actually a piece of technology, an invention designed for a specific purpose by specific people at a specific point in history? That's the whole idea behind his investigation, to dig up the family tree, the genealogy of our values.
Now, before Nietzsche came along, the accepted story was, well, pretty simple. It was championed by what he called the English psychologists, and it went something like this. Originally, selfless acts were called good by the people who benefited from them. Makes sense. Then, over time, everyone just kind of forgot why they were called good and became a habit. Nietzsche thought this was not just simple, but laughably totally wrong. He was convinced the real story was way more dramatic and a whole lot darker.
Okay, so to crack this case, Nietzsche basically becomes a detective of words, a philologist. He believed the original meanings of good and bad were buried in ancient languages, like little fossils, and they held the key, the first real clue to a moral world that we have almost completely forgotten about.
And here's his first bombshell discovery. In the ancient world of the aristocratic masters, think Homeric Greeks, the Roman nobility, the word good had nothing to do with being selfless. In fact, it was the total opposite. It was a celebration of the self. Good just meant noble, powerful, high status, strong. It was the ruling class looking at themselves and saying, yeah, we're the good ones. And bad? Well, bad wasn't evil. It just meant common, plebeian, lowly and weak. It was a social distinction, not a moral one.
And Nietzsche's description of this is so visceral. He doesn't hold back. He talks about this magnificent blonde beast. And just to be clear, he means a type of person, like a lion, not a literal race, prowling around unapologetically taking what it wants. This beast represents a powerful, life-affirming spirit that just acts on instinct, without any shame or guilt. That was the original foundation of goodness. It was a force of nature, not some kind of moral calculation.
Okay, but wait. If that was the original morality, how in the world did we end up where we are today, where things like meekness and self-sacrifice are considered good? Well, this is where Nietzsche's investigation uncovers the big twist in the story, a secret psychological rebellion that completely flipped the world of values on its head.
And the weapon used in this rebellion is so important to understand. He calls it resentment. Now, this isn't just your everyday resentment. No, this is a deep, poisonous stew of envy, hatred, and helplessness that the weak and oppressed felt simmering inside them toward their masters. They couldn't fight back for real, so all that hatred turned inward. It festered, and it looked for an outlet in a kind of imaginary spiritual revenge.
And this chart, this right here, is the heart of Nietzsche's discovery. You see, master morality starts from a place of yes. It says, we, the noble and powerful, are good. Bad is just an afterthought. It's just not us. But slave morality, it starts with a giant no, aimed at the outside world. Fueled by that resentment, it looks up at the masters and says, you are evil. And this is a massive invention. Evil isn't just bad anymore. It's this malicious, damnable thing. And only after defining the master as evil can the slave turn around and define himself as good, as the opposite of that evil. The entire moral world has been inverted.
And to prove this isn't just some crazy theory, Nietzsche pulls out receipts. He points to the raw, vengeful fantasy at the core of this new morality. He brings up this absolutely chilling quote from Thomas Aquinas, the idea that people in heaven will enjoy their happiness more by watching their old enemies suffer in hell. For Nietzsche, this just exposes the deep well of resentment this value system is built on. At its core, it's a morality of revenge. So the values got turned upside down. But how did this new morality, something born from weakness, actually manage to conquer the powerful masters? How did it take over the entire Western world? Well, the next clue in our case lies in the creation of an unbelievably powerful psychological weapon.
You know, as humans, we're forced to live together in societies, with rules and peace, all their natural aggressive instincts, the instincts of that beast of prey, they suddenly had nowhere to go.
You couldn't just go out and conquer things anymore. So where did all that energy go? It turned inward. It was directed against man himself. This, Nietzsche says, is the origin of the bad conscience and what we call the soul. Humanity basically became an animal that was sick of itself, creating this inner world of self-torture that we now call guilt.
This brings us to the final question in our investigation, the big why. Why on earth would humanity do this to itself? Why embrace such a painful, self-hating system? What was the ultimate motive for this massive, historical act of self-crucifixion?
The answer, Nietzsche says, lies in the absolute genius of the ascetic priest. He saw the suffering masses, and he gave them a brilliant and terrible explanation for it all. He didn't say, "You suffer because your masters oppress you." No, he said, "You suffer because you are a sinner. It's your fault." And with that one move, all that poisonous resentment was redirected inward. All of a sudden, their suffering wasn't meaningless anymore. It was a punishment. It was a test. It finally had a purpose.
And this is the final, jaw-dropping reveal of the whole case. This entire system of guilt, sin, and self-denial, what Nietzsche calls the ascetic ideal, wasn't in the end about destroying life. It was a crazy, paradoxical trick for the preservation of life. By giving suffering a meaning, any meaning at all, it saved humanity from the alternative, believing that life is totally pointless. It shut the door on total, suicidal nihilism.
So, Nietzsche's investigation gives us this incredibly disturbing origin story for our morality. But he doesn't just tie it up with a bow and close the file. He argues this whole story isn't just some historical curiosity, it's a living, breathing challenge to us right here and right now.
This is the demand he makes right at the beginning of his book. Now that we've seen the crime scene, the suspicious circumstances under which our values were born, now that we've seen the motives and the weapons, we just can't take them for granted anymore. He's saying we now have a duty to put our own values on trial to really question what they're worth to us today.
And so, the case is officially handed over to you. Nietzsche's genealogy isn't really an answer, it's a question. After tracing our morality all the way back to a rebellion fueled by weakness, revenge, and a deep-seated hatred for life's raw power, he forces us to ask, are these the values we still want to live by? Now that we've seen where they came from, what are they really worth? And that's the question he leaves us with, a case that is very much still open. Thanks for joining this explainer.